Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center here at the Heartland Institute. We have a nice crowd. If y'all, there's still more food in the back. You're welcome to grab extra food and stuff. I want to introduce the Heartland Institute to you. We are a 32-year-old national think tank that focuses on state issues instead of all the national issues. We do 4 newspapers, which I've got here every week. Every elected official across the country gets one of these newspapers. So we do healthcare, environment and climate, budget and tax, and the most important is school reform. And that's why all of y'all are here tonight, because my take and a lot of other people's take is until you fix the education system, we're never fixing everything else in the country. So, for those of you who don't know yet, on September 15th, PJ O'Rourke is coming to our annual benefit dinner at the Cotillion right down the street. So feel free to grab a flyer over here, get more information, or see one of the staff members, and we'll give you more information so you can come see PJ O'Rourke in our crazy political season. It's always a good time to laugh every so often instead of crying. So tonight we are going to be discussing Common Core. And I'd like to, on your tables is actually the second release of Joy Pullman's Common Core book, A Bad Choice for America. There's more copies on the table to the left. You're welcome to pick up more copies. If you have a group that you want to get some distribution to, feel free to let me know, and I can arrange to get you more of these booklets that you can pass out with your group, your friends and neighbors and stuff as well. Also on your table, if every one of you here that's here is interested in education, the Stop the Test card, that's actually my business card too, on the back. So you can get in touch with me and help us work on stopping the Common Core test, a line test everywhere that's around the country as well. So tonight we have 2 special guests to discuss Common Core and a way to fix education and what free education actually looks like. Our first speaker is Marsha Enright. She is an educational entrepreneur and an educator who writes about many topics ranging from neuropsychology to contemporary literature. Wanting to foster a love of learning in children, she actually founded the Council Oak Montessori Elementary School in 1990. She currently serves as the president of the elementary school, which is named one of the top private elementary schools in Chicago. Disgusted with the state of higher education, she also created the Reason Individualism Freedom Institute, a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to empower young and older adults with the ideas of individualism, reason, and critical thinking, which is something sorely lacking in our higher education and K-12 education now. Our second speaker is Mr. Jeffrey Horn. He is a PhD, a grassroots activist, and a data scientist. He combined with his passion of computer science with his belief in personal freedom to advocate against Common Core and high-stakes testing in Wisconsin. He's a professional programmer who builds infrastructure to leverage large sets of data and lead the campaign to send open letters to state elected officials, which resulted in several public hearings on Common Core all across the Badger State. Also, in the back, for $25, you can buy his book, his and Kirsten Lombard's book for Common Ground on Common Core. And you see Billy in the back there, $25.
Marsha also has a chapter in the book.
Okay. So, just to give you a little bit of overview of how we're going to work tonight, Marsha will come up and speak, and with their presentation, then Jeffrey will speak. Then we'll open up to have a Q&A as well. So you guys, if you come, as you're sitting there, make notes if you have any questions you want to ask later. And we'll be bringing around microphones for that purpose as well. And I'm sure that the guests will be happy to stick around a little afterwards if you have more questions than we can actually get answered. And one quick other note, to my left over here, there's a bookcase where we actually have a surplus of books. All those books are $1 each. If you'd like to buy a book and take home. And if you're looking for research materials or you just love to read, if there's a book you can't find, our library here, the Harry Mazur Library, is actually around here, comes all the way around behind me. We've got almost 10,000 volumes now of books that a lot of people don't have, from economics, education, Russian psychology. I mean, very eclectic mix of things, and a whole economic libraries and stuff here too. If you want to just come and sit in here one day and just read and see what kind of books we have, we actually have a list online of all the books we have if you want to look before you come to see what we've got. So with that, I'd like to, also online, if you have a question, make sure you send us your question online as well. And now I'd like to welcome Marsha to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to see you here. Before I get started talking about the collectivists, I want to bring up something that's really near to my heart for people who. Sorry, I tend to walk around. So I want to bring up something that's near to my heart that I don't think people in the freedom movement think about all the time, and that's the issue of that is what kind of people do we want to foster through our education? If we want a free society, what kind of people do we want to foster? Should I use this one? No. Okay. Is it on? No. Hello? Okay. We want to see people who are active, who are independent in their thinking, who are able to reason well, who can give themselves their own goals. Basically, people who are like entrepreneurs of their own life, whatever profession that they're in. And something, in the freedom movement, there are a lot of people teaching the ideas about freedom, but they don't think about the way they're teaching and whether the way they're teaching actually supports the idea of being a free person, of developing autonomy. So I just want to talk about that a little bit before I get started on the collectivists. And I have a presentation here.
Can that be blown up at all?
The different parts end up getting bigger. Is that better? Okay, so here we're asking the question, how do we make the methodology of our classrooms consonant with our goals for a free society? And these are our premises, that people tend, if they're left free, if you think about a 2-year-old, you can hardly stop a 2-year-old from learning. You have to beat that child really badly to stop them from exploring. What happens by the time they're 8 years old and they're in school? Everybody takes that for granted, but there's something wrong with that because people start out really wanting to know and wanting to learn, and it gets bored out of them, basically. So, but in a free society where you want people to be very active and self-responsible, you want to foster something where they're going to be very self-educating. They're always going to be wanting to learn. So that's one of our first premises. And we want a free society, and that the classroom that you're teaching the ideas in are a micro-society. So they're a way, and the way that you conduct yourself in the classroom actually teaches students how do you behave with each other, right? What would we like to foster? We'd like to foster the habits and virtues that you need for a free society. Rational independence, peaceful cooperation, creativity, active pursuit of life-affirming values. These are the things we'd like to encourage in the classroom if you want free people. Oops. The fact of the matter is, in self-education, you can lead a human to knowledge, but you can't make him think. We need these habits and virtues. How do we foster them? What prepares students for a collaborative, creative culture of the free society? A classroom that's like a factory, where you have a physical environment where you're stuck in a desk, you can't walk around, you can't talk to each other. Maria Montessori said, "We learn so much as adults from talking to each other. Why do we make children be silent in a classroom?" Where you've got one guy who's the authority and everybody's listening to him. do you this is Hitler over here. Think of this paradigm of the classroom lecture, right? The paradigm I see of this is that the students are empty vesicles that you're going to fill with knowledge. The teacher's going to fill with knowledge. But we know that that's not necessarily what happens, and we know that because the students come away not really knowing a lot in the long run. So is that really a paradigm for teaching them how to think and how to act and interact with each other? They don't even get a chance to interact with each other, right? Do we want someplace that's like a police state where the students have to be watched over by the police? Do we want a social environment like that? Or do we want one that's cooperative and collaborative? So what's the role of the educator? As I see it, the role of the educator is the gardener, the person who creates the optimal environment to encourage human learning and advancement, to encourage the students to learn how to think for themselves. You want to make it rich intellectually, socially, physically. You want to set everything up like that. And the educator ends up being the guide for the students. So you can plant a seed of a sunflower, and you can put it under a rock, and it'll try to grow, and it'll come out all deformed and struggling, right? But we don't want deformed and struggling. We want beautiful. We want flourishing. We want people to be able to develop in the maximal way that they can for each individual. The alternative is a collaborative classroom, where this is the kind of thing. I run a program in the summer for high school and college students, and we use this collaborative methodology where I set up the curriculum, I create the physical environment. We're often in a room also, but sometimes we go outside. I'm there not to be telling them what to think. Instead, we use very, very excellent texts, like works from the classics, from across the range of ideas. It might be philosophy, it might be physics, it might be poetry, economics, so that in our discussion, they learn how to understand the text for themselves. I guide them to help them by questions, not my questions about what does it mean, not my leading questions, telling them, like telegraphing to them, oh, this is the answer. But by asking them questions to help them understand what is this author. I see the authors as really the teachers, and that's why you want to pick the best thinkers possible, the best writers. And then they work with each other on it, and they learn. We have a very carefully crafted way in which we talk to each other. They have to be civil. They have to have evidence and reasoning for everything that they say. They can't grandstand and bring in material from the outside and kind of say, you know, you're reading Kant, and well, they start lecturing you on everything to do with Kant's life. It has to be the evidence in front of you, and you're all looking at that evidence together, and you're all examining it together. And what happens is that they develop incredible reasoning powers, and they feel very confident by the end of the week that they can understand anything for themselves firsthand. And that's the kind of thing I'd like to see, because when they go out in the world, I want them to be able to not have to rely on an authority for anything. I want them to be confident that they can understand anything they come across themselves and decide, is this good and bad? Is this right and wrong? Is this supporting my rights? Is this supporting what's good for a free society or not? There's a lot more to say about this, but I thought I'd just give you a little taste of it. So, conclusion. Education must aim at improving the individual in order to improve society. I wanted to go over that a little bit first, just to show you what my point of view is, because I'll talk to you a little bit about what the collectivists are doing in our education system, and then what I think could be possible in a free society, what you might see in education if we had a really free market. So many of you are probably aware of the continuing control that the collectivists have on academia. I don't know how many have followed this. You see it in the fact that 95% of all professors are Democrats. Okay. You see it in the fact that there are hardly any professors that are of a libertarian or even conservative point of view, even if they're in things like biology and they get found out, the rest of the faculty finds a way to get them out or make life miserable for them. I mean, it sounds so conspiratorial, but there are just story after story after story about this. And if you know the history, what happened was that in the 60s, we had the New Left cultural, turmoil with the student protests and everything. And they were trying to change our society directly by protests and by violence. Well, they figured out that that wasn't possible. So they went into education. There's even a quote I saw recently in the Chronicles of Higher Education where one of the professors says, "Oh yeah, I was one of those 60s radicals. They thought we disappeared, but we didn't. We're here." And I don't know how many of you remember the Weathermen from the 60s, the bombers, right? And one of the main movers in that was a guy named Bill Ayers, right? Sorry, all of a sudden I had one of those brain glitches. And his dad got him out of getting in really big trouble because his dad was head of ComEd. And what did he do? He became a professor of education. And then he became an emeritus professor of education at the University of Illinois, and he was in charge of the NEA certification process. He was one of the people certifying teachers. And one of the kinds of things that these people did was they instituted a criteria that you had to believe in social justice to get your certification. I don't know if that's still going on, but I know about 5 years ago when I was researching it, that was one of the criteria. And they infiltrated the whole of academia. So, like I said, 95%, right? So we know that's going on. You see all kinds of crazy things happening these days. Like, I don't know how many of you saw last fall the tantrum video at Yale, because there was some question about whether some Halloween costumes were offensive. And there's a video on YouTube where this girl is basically having just a ranting, raving tantrum against the professor who said, you know, let's be reasonable, let people decide for themselves what to wear. That kind of thing. I mean, there's just endless stories nowadays of the crazy things going on campus. You know about the safe spaces? You know about the free speech zones where there's like a little square where you can go and actually talk? I mean, it's insane, right? It's insane because education is supposed to be about learning ideas and making up your own mind. At least that's what it always was before. And when we know that government education on the lower level is a very high cost and very poor quality. So that's going on. And this has had a terrible negative impact in today's rapidly changing economy because the students are not being prepared to deal with having to learn new things. It was Ann Neal, who was the head of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. I saw her at a conference, and she said that Americans on average between the age of 25 and 45 will change their career 11 times. Okay, you have to, sometimes it's within a company, but sometimes it's between companies, but you have to be very versatile, right? You have to be able to learn new things in order to change from one career to another, and our economy is pushing us to do that. How do we compete with the rest of the world? How do we stay on top of the rest of the world? We're not manufacturing as much anymore and all that because we're still one of the most creative country in the world. We have people who come up with all kinds of great ideas and new products. And you have to be able to change what you're doing in order to work on those products. The thing is, this collectivist control of education goes back a lot farther than you might think. I don't know how many of you know, but the public education model, that the Pilgrims were, it's a very interesting story. The Pilgrims were a very unusual group of people who were immigrants, and they because they came over for an idea of freedom, they came over in families. They were some of the most highly educated people over in Europe and middle class, and they didn't have to leave because of they needed new jobs or anything like that. They were very dedicated to learning. I mean, they had their problems because, of course, they ended up having the witch trials and all that, but they were very dedicated to individuals learning for themselves, reading for themselves, and making up their own mind. And so they instituted institutions of education almost from the beginning that they were here. They required people to learn how to read. Harvard, they came over in 1620, and Harvard was established in 1636. And their influence, if you look at Boston, it still has the most colleges and universities in the country. But their influence influenced the whole country, our whole country of the United States, to be very enraptured with education as a way to change the world, to change their country, to change your life. Well, because of this, people were worried about, okay, the people who came over for these ideas were very interested in education. But then we had all these immigrants coming over just to escape oppression, to get jobs, and they were of different cultures. So the original WASPs who were here were very worried about whether those people would be educated enough to really participate properly in a democracy, in a Republican democracy. And that's where the push for a public education program came from. So the first one was established by Horace Mann in Boston in 1837, I think. Oh, no, it was a little bit earlier than that. I think it was about 1832. Except he based it on the Prussian system, which was started with Martin Luther in the 1540s. And the interest there was to conform people to the state, to make sure that they were properly educated so that they would be good citizens in the state. And the Prussian system was specifically designed to encourage obedience. So you had that instituted in the public education system from the beginning. The interesting thing about it was 5 years after Mann instituted it in Boston, this is what he said. He noted about the Massachusetts system that he had helped found, quote, "It has an obvious want of intelligence in the reading classes. The schools have retrograded within the last generation or half generation in regard to orthography, which is writing. More than 11/12 of all the children in the reading classes in our schools do not understand the meaning of the words they read." So this is 5 years after establishing the public education system. Does it sound like today? I mean, doesn't it sound like the same complaints we have today? In 1870, William Franklin Phelps, then head of a normal school in Winona, Minnesota, normal schools where they teach teachers, and later president of the National Education Association, declared, "Children are fed upon the mere husks of knowledge. They leave school for the broad theater of life without discipline, without mental power, or moral stamina. Hundreds of our American schools are little less than undisciplined juvenile mobs." 1870. Here's another one. "Our schools are, in a sense, factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned into products to meet the various demands of life. The specifications for manufacturing come from the demands of 20th century civilization, and is the business of the school to build, its pupils according to specifications laid down." That sounds to me like what they're doing with Common Core, the motivation behind Common Core. No, it's from the early 20th century. So Common Core is only the latest in a long line of government education programs that impair rather than empower citizens. They started out with a legitimate Republican purpose to make sure that the citizens were educated. But it's a terrible failure from preschool through college if you look at what's happened. So what's the fundamental alternative to that? Well, we know private education works well because it's customer-driven rather than bureaucracy mandated. It provides wide-ranging options. Its outcomes are notably different, right? And I don't know how many of you've seen this, but there was an interesting study that was done a few years ago by business professors that found an unusual number of creative and successful people that had been to Montessori schools. They were surprised at this outcome. And it was people like Jeff Bezos, Sergey Brin and Larry Page Jeff Bezos is from Amazon, Google's Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Anne Frank, Wikipedia's Jimmy Wales, renowned violinist Joshua Bell, French chef Julia Child, and management expert Peter Drucker. So those are just a few. The Wall Street Journal had an article called "The Montessori Mafia" because of this. Here's another interesting thing that's happening. In India, people are really, the public education system is terrible. So extremely poor families in India, they find a way to get private instruction, and this enables their children to learn enough to have social mobility. So we're talking about really, really, really poor families, and yet they're finding a way to pay for private instruction. There's a private tutor in Korea, Kim Ki-hoon, who earns $4 million a year because of the advantages that he gives to his students. So what would education be like in a free society? Well, I think if you stop to think about what the iPhone market is, what the smartphone market is like, it might give us an idea, right? Everything's individualized. There's like a riotous variety of different options for you. There would be schools specifically for kids that had certain kinds of difficulties. There would be schools for the smartest kids. There would be schools for parents who wanted to send them to their kids to religious schools. There would be secular schools, science schools, and there would be urban schools. There would be country schools. It would just be, we probably can't even imagine how fantastic it could be if we had those kinds of options. Think about the options you have with the smartphone and just imagine that kind of variety with education. I hope I talk about this in a lot more detail in my essay in the Common Core book, Kirsten's Common Core book. I have a lot of data in there if you're interested, and also a more spinning out of what private education would be like in a free society. Oh, and here's the other thing. People are worried, what would happen with parents that can't afford private education or aren't interested? Well, think of all the money that's already put into private education. So there's plenty of people who support that. I can imagine there being incredible scholarships for poor kids, except administered a lot better than when it comes through the government, right? And I can imagine also, even if you have a worry that there are parents that don't care about their kids, I can imagine private charities getting together of people who are worried about that and who find ways to incentivize those parents to send their kids to school. So we just can't even imagine, right? We haven't had the opportunity to imagine what would happen. We see a little of it in the United States because we have the most colleges and universities in the world. By 1830, we had more colleges and universities in Ohio than in the whole of Europe. So that just gives you a little idea. So thank you very much, and I'll be glad to come and answer questions.
Hi there. I wanted to come and talk to you tonight about something that's not talked about too often when we talk about Common Core, and that's what the real goals are behind it. Whoop. You're all Americans, most of you anyway, or you're at least familiar. We're quite used to getting what we want. And in this generation, more than any previous, I think. And we're also used to paying as little as possible for it. Just before I came here, I quickly ran over to Walgreens to get a USB charger for a phone that we'd left a charger at home with. You're used to going to Walmart and getting things cheap, and you're expecting that it's all going to be there. You're expecting to go online to a place like Amazon.com, and not only are you expecting to find what you want there, you're expecting that they're probably going to be telling you what you want. And in an amazing way that you don't even suspect. Now, when it comes to our hopes and dreams for our children, a lot of those wants, a lot of those expectations really become needs, urgent needs that we feel. And we feel that just like with Amazon or Walmart that really leverage computers to really cut the costs by really controlling the supply chain and really anticipate our needs by doing preference engines and all kinds of artificial intelligence, that we should be able to leverage technology to provide our children with a world-class education and that it should be very cost effective and affordable. That's not what we're seeing. I'm not saying all these statements are true, but this is what people say about education these days. They say that the cost of educating our children is ever on the rise. All of our children are falling behind other nations. We all fear that our children will not be better off than we are, that our children are not being prepared for the jobs of the future. And frankly, a lot of us feel that our children are not going to be able to find gainful employment at all in the future. The solution, of course, is that we can provide our students with access to iPads and laptops. We have standardized assessments that can be taken on state-of-the-art devices with touch screens, and the data fed right into a big computer that'll be able to analyze it. They're provided with personalized learning environments and efficient technology-rich classrooms. And we use big data and data mining techniques to really deliver children ready to work in the jobs of the future. And it's about time, right? We're ready for our wishes to be granted. And frankly, we expect them to be, just as we do in the marketplace. Add to that the bonus of technology that promises to weed out those bad teachers and reward the good, and we're sold. Right along, parents are sold right along with the taxpayers. And even Common Core, really. I mean, we're willing to take Common Core standards and the streamlining of education they bring with them. Say absolutely, if they're going to make education more efficient and drive down the costs. But be careful what you wish for. There's a downside to the future jobs. We all expect that our schools are going to prepare our children for the jobs of the future. I don't think most of us realize what those jobs are. And I'd like to look at Walmart briefly and then Amazon briefly and take you on a walk through how it is to work there. At Walmart, they have something they instituted in the 90s, but they've updated it up to today, called their Task Manager. And this is a centralized computer system that controls all of their stores across the country. It tells people what's going to go out onto the floor, which employee is going to put it there, how long they have to do that, and then it tracks them to figure out to make sure that they've spent that amount of time and not much more. So they make sure that all of these tasks are done as specified in all their stores across the country. It singles out employees who miss those target times, and they're singled out and given what are called coachings at Walmart. They have decision-making D-days for certain employees where they have to explain their actions or they'll be fired. But this allows Walmart to consistently ratchet up the pressure on their employees to produce and provide low costs to you. Similarly, Amazon employees pretty much labor under oppressive state-of-the-art. It's really well-known, very efficient business system that tracks minute by minute their movements, their literal movements throughout warehouses. Their scientific managers have determined exactly the one best way for people to locate a product, to pack it, and to ship it. And they actually fit their employees with GPS units and track them and their route through the warehouses. Oh, I'll go back. So the exact path. They don't want them to take an alternate path or add any variety. They want them to go the way they're supposed to. The computers also set target times for the trips, and then they record that and judge the employees accordingly. So there's dirty little secrets to this economy of the future and what jobs of the future really mean. In order to produce students ready for these jobs of the future, teachers and school administrators are increasingly subject to the same kinds of high-stakes scrutiny that employees at Walmart and Amazon endure. If you look at a lot of these longitudinal data systems that they're building to hold Common Core data, and then to judge not only the students as they're in terms of their readiness for the future, but also the teachers in terms of how they're performing on the students, they're doing exactly the same thing that I described. And in fact, although I give the Amazon of Walmart and Amazon because they're so high profile and so large, you're starting to see this in many companies. Even medium-sized local type companies are starting to perform these kind of monitoring and judging things on their employees. The National Governors Association put out a document a couple years ago called Benchmarking for Success, and it not only calls for the adoption of Common Core state standards, but it also calls for schools to be held, schools and systems to be held accountable through monitoring, interventions, and support to ensure consistently high performance. That word interventions is very similar to the kind of thing Walmarts do with their D-days and these kind of things. And other businesses do too. Wow, this thing's sensitive. There we go. Now, there's nothing really new under the sun. Just as Marsha said earlier, a lot of this is similar to things that were at least thought about or dreamt about by some in the early 20th century. Frederick Winslow Taylor, the father of Taylorism or managerialism, said that what I demand of the worker is not to produce any longer by his own initiative, but to execute punctitiously the orders given down to their minutest detail. So what's actually being exercised here is something called technical control. In the schools now, we are creating essentially an assembly line, but it's been replaced instead of a physical assembly line where students move physically through a school. It's basically being enforced by scripted curriculum and performance metrics that are tied to assessments that enforce them. I want to point out, and it maybe is obvious, but that Common Core aligned assessments serve as measures from deviance. So they both describe which students are excelling beyond the average and which are falling well below the average from the standardized norm. It distinguishes winners from losers, and as such, it can be looked at and should probably be looked at as a surveillance tool. It gives, at a more and more minute level of detail and a more and more real-time level of detail, a window into exactly what that student is thinking, doing, and capable of. Students either pass or fail, teachers either meet expectations or fall short, and educational administrators and policymakers can efficiently monitor in real time. They can sit in a school office or in a district office, or quite frankly, if not now, at least in the future in Washington, D.C., and see how the students are learning. And then they can single out for further analysis any action that either needs to be taken with a student or a teacher based on that. It's a control system. Common Core provides a framework for fine-grained control of both the labor, which is teachers, and the raw materials, which in this case is students involved in the education process. Students can be easily tracked and managed. Teachers are ranked, sorted, and rewarded, and disciplined, all in real time. I wanted to talk about just what this does to people. Common, well, it objectifies them. It turns students, like we said here, into raw products that are being worked on. But common implies that any given student can be assessed universally, fairly, and objectively across all the different populations. That regardless of your ethnic background or your socioeconomic background, or whether you live in the country or the city, or whether you live in, the northern part of the country, the southern part of the country, whether you live on the street or whether you live in a mansion, they believe that this one set of common tests can assess you, the individual, the same as it can assess anyone else. Common assumes that a student is a student is a student. But we're really snowflakes, right? The problem is that students and teachers are in fact unique individuals. They have widely varying interests, talents, and challenges. But all of their data is being put in longitudinal data systems. It tracks the student progress. It provides quality control over the raw material. It's exactly analogous to computer-based systems that are used to control places like Amazon, Walmart, or any large company, any large global company. The only real difference is that the raw material being processed and tested here for quality is our children. They're depersonalized. The very fact that they've been reduced to numbers and statistics and icons on a screen allows administrators and bureaucrats to move them around and readjust them in the way that seems optimal, but doesn't take into account any of their individual traits. Now I wanted to say this, a lot of what you'll read, and I think what you'll read in this Common Core book that's on the table, it's correct. It talks about a profit motive for companies like Pearson and Microsoft and how this whole circle of new standards create new tests, which create new prep material, which sells new textbooks, and it goes on and makes dollars, and that's all very true. But a big, and I would say actually a bigger motive for why so many companies are pushing Common Core is that they're interested in what the schools produce. And what do they want them to produce? Well, let's look at the Walton and Bezos family. That's the Walmart and the Amazon family, right? They support major education reform now, Teach for America and the Knowledge is Power program, which is a charter school, each of which support Common Core standards, high-stakes standardized testing, and value-added measure accountability measures. As such, they really ascribe to what was described in this report. And if you've gone to any other Common Core talks, you've probably seen this report. It's from the Department of Education. You can still go to their website and download this. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. And what it's really well known for is that there's all sorts of these science fiction-y type of devices in it that talk about hooking students up to monitors and having mice that take their pulse during tests and measuring their breathing and their facial expressions during tests just to try to get all kinds of information. That's all in there. But what I think you need to pay close attention to is the overriding reason that they give for why students need to be in a Common Core curriculum. They say students can develop psychological resources that promote grit, tenacity, and perseverance, including effortful control, in which students are constantly faced with tasks that are important for long-term goals, but that in the short term may not feel desirable or intrinsically motivating. So let that sink in. They want to make them deal with things that do not feel desirable or intrinsically motivating. That's what you and I might call, they want to make them deal with long periods of being bored. Successful students by themselves or with support of others marshal willpower to regulate their attention in the face of distractions. And this is what we're building. Okay, this is what we're building here is a society that, and I know they put these Common Core standards out there in terms of math and English, and people criticize them as standards in math and English, but I think it's a complete bait and switch. I don't think that it's really out there to control whether students are learning math or English. It's an excuse that they give while the whole time they're training them to deal with boredom, deal with tough situations that they can't understand. I want to just skip here. This is the biggest thing that I think is the sickest part of this. By setting up these value-added measure hierarchies where they judge teachers based on their children's skills, they've turned teachers, which are probably our second largest role model for our kids. Usually their parents, and then they look up to their teachers. But what do they see their teachers doing? They see their teachers persevering as they present scripted curricula, continuing onward even though they're being judged and they're under all this pressure to perform based on the tests. This modeling teaches that constant monitoring is normal. Okay, so little kids are seeing that the adults in their life, their role models, are being constantly monitored, and they're accepting it. And they don't have any choice but see that, because any teachers that don't accept it either leave of their own accord or are gotten rid of. So they see a bunch of willing sheep, and that's their role model. So the students learn that the purpose of this accountability for the teachers, the shaping of their very lives and futures, is acceptable. And it's what they should expect when they grow up and get a job. So that's the presentation here. There's more, and I write about this extensively again in the book, but I think we have time for questions and answers now.
I'll ask Marsha to come back up to the stage here. And you can go on over to the chair. And as we kind of get set up here, if you have questions, want to give you a little bit of instructions here. Kyle and I will be going back and forth across the room, asking questions. Wait for the mic to be in front of you, because it's not going to be recorded if the mic's not in front of you. If you'd like to state your name, then ask your question, and then and remember the book at the end. Also, Kelsey is going to be passing around a survey. We'd love for you to fill that out as well and give it back to her. So just leave it on the table when you're in. I'll put it on the registration when you leave. It's always good to get feedback on what you like, what you don't like. If you have suggestions for speakers, please feel free to put that on there. If you'd like us to have these speakers back again, please write that on there so we know as well. So we'll open up the question. Kyle has the first question here.
Thank you. My name's Jane Carroll, and I wanted to mention two aspects of the system in Finland and ask you two to just comment on that. This is the country that we're all hoping to be. They have the most successful students. And first of all, they don't start teaching reading until the student is 7. And also, half the kids at high school age are shunted off into a tech prep curriculum, which works out very well. They're not putting square pegs in round holes for academic work. Can you comment on, no wonder we're not doing that well according to Finland?
Did you want to make a... yeah, I think Finland has a lot of advantages in what it does. I understand that they allow the teachers to create their own curriculum, and that they adapt it to the individual students that they have. And certainly we have had this push from the last 30 years that everybody should go to college, and they've gotten rid of so many of the technical and craft programs, and that's a big problem. I think that's come to light recently. You know, you have to remember something about Finland, though, that's different than the United States. It's a very homogeneous population. So you're dealing with people who are physically, ethnically, genetically, and culturally extremely similar to one another. And that's a much easier problem to solve than it is in the United States. We have this vast array of people from around the world, all different types, backgrounds, interests, cultures. So I'm not sure that it's always fair to compare them to us. And one of the things I wanted to mention about the Common Core book that Kirsten edited that I think is really valuable is it's called Common Core, Common Ground on Common Core, because she managed to assemble, is it 17? Yeah, 17 authors from across the political spectrum. So it's not just libertarians writing, it's leftists, it's Democrats, it's all this, but all of whom are against the Common Core curriculum for various reasons. And I remember one of the essays that I thought was really interesting and revealing was on the testing of math across the world, and how we seem to come out low on that. And what he talks about in there is there are many countries who do not report all of the tests. So they just report their top people, okay? And they don't report all the kids in the far-flung Uyghur, provinces of China who are getting a terrible education in some small school or whatever, and what they're getting on math. So it's not just China, but there are other countries that are doing things like that. So it's hard to tell, in some respects, how we're doing compared to the rest of the world in that respect. We need to be compared to countries that report similarly, and that's not, believe me, that's not because I think what's going on here is great, but just you have to be wary of the statistics because of it.
I could say a couple things about Finland. I think they have a much healthier approach to testing. They consider tests a tool that teachers not only use, but usually create themselves either on the spot or during their lesson planning. I think students in Finland take one, maybe two standardized government tests in their lifetime. We're moving here to at least tests, for over a week in every grade. And we're actually moving to where these daily tests, the kind of thing where, were they listening today? Did they understand what I did in the lesson today? What teacher in Finland will create their own test just to see that. They'll look at the results and say, yeah, I can move on, or no, I need to review. Here, the teachers they're not even taught in the colleges anymore how to create their own tests. They just use the same test, and then that information is now being fed into a central computer. It goes on a permanent record. This teachers immediately judged that day and ranked. In today's lesson, we all taught polynomial factoring, and, well, this was the Bourse teacher. They need to explain themselves. It's a completely different approach, and that's one of the reasons I think they're coming out at least ahead on a lot of things.
Next question's over there, then we'll come over here.
Can I say one more thing about testing? And that is that the research shows, okay, today we have an obsession with what's called summative testing, which is at the end of a course, you check whether the person has learned all the data that you want them to learn. But the research on what kind of testing actually works is what's called formative testing, and that's, I think, what they're doing in Finland, where the teacher, as they're going along, sees what the student is doing and whether they're understanding things or not, and adjusts what they're teaching to whether the student is comprehending. So it's much more individualized, and when you do this kind of formative testing, the students end up learning a lot more. So sorry to make you wait a little longer.
That's okay. Also in Finland, they only teach one language in the schools. In Minneapolis, we teach 80 plus languages. Mm-hmm. I just want to commend Heartland for all these programs. This is a terrific organization, so thank whoever from Heartland. This is terrific. And both the speakers tonight, you're very good, and you said a lot of good things. But how do we get parents involved that have kids at the school? As I look around here, we're all in our 90s. Isn't that about right? But anyway, my concern is that we, when I go to the shopping center or restaurants and I look around, our parents today are clueless. They're stressed. And so they don't know what's going on. And so there's a vacuum. And as you pointed out, education decisions are driven by the teachers union and liberals and so on and so forth. And that's a given. And we've got to find a way to change that. You know, you mentioned Bill Ayers. I used to report to Tom Ayers, his father, directly, so I know a lot about that. And he's very influential, and he's still speaking to teachers' meetings around the world. But one of the things we have to, if we're going to improve education, we got to look at the elephant in the room. And what is the elephant in the room? It's broken families. When 73% of the blacks are born out of wedlock, and in St. Paul schools, it's 83%. We have broken families, and so kids drop out of school and get in trouble. And until we face this issue of broken families, and this means we have to reform welfare, which keeps people, if I can use a biblical term, our job is to strengthen people. And I belong to a church that says, oh no, the problem is white racism. Well, I'm a lifetime member of NACP and da-da-da-da. That is a problem, but we've got to focus on strengthening families. And the other thing is, kids have to work. So what are we doing? In Voc Ed, we have to teach kids how to work for starter jobs. There are all kinds of starter jobs out there. The jobs we did as older people. We mowed lawns, we washed dishes, we made beds, we picked crops. I meet with the Urban League today. Oh, no, those jobs are not good, the starter jobs. Our job is voter education and fighting white racism. Well, we've got to strengthen the family, and we have to revitalize Voc Ed and teach basic skills. And by the way, I did that in the Lawndale Public Schools, and I had kids out in the neighborhoods with their shop teachers learning how to rehab homes. We can do that. So those two issues, strengthen the family and Voc Ed, and we got to address the parents that are clueless today. I'm sorry for going on too long.
Hello, I'm David Perenboom. I went to a public high school. Oh, I'm not close enough, thank you. I went to a public high school, and even thinking back now, many decades later, I got a pretty good education out of that high school. I was near Madison, Wisconsin, and then I went to university from there. But between then and now, I think, my view, and I'm not an expert in education, of course, but I think that the big change was the federalizing of what previously had been local community projects. You know, the schools were local, they were owned and paid for by the taxpayers of the local community, and the parents interested in the education of their children, you know, got involved with the local politics of running their school properly for the sake of their kids. Then the Department of Education got created, and I think, to me, my simplistic way of looking at it was that, you know, that's where the wheels started coming off. Any comment?
No, I think you're exactly right. In fact, it's interesting. Back in, I think it might have been 1993 or something like that, there were two researchers at the Brookings Institute, which is quite a liberal institution, that did research on schools all across the country, public, private, urban, suburban, country, and which ones had the best education. And what they came up with was the ones that had local control. So that fits with what you were saying, and I think you're exactly right that the feds took over and they made it very difficult for people to be responsive to their customers, the people running the schools.
Yeah, like so many things in our country, we still talk about local control, but it's largely a lie. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson passed the first bill where the federal government started funding schools, and in return for that, they expected some control.
Title IX? Is that Title?
No, what is it called? Yeah. That's right. So that has had different names, but it's come up for reauthorization. The most recent ones that you may have heard about are No Child Left Behind, was a reauthorization of the same bill. Race to the Top, a reauthorization of the same bill. And most recently, the Every Student Succeeds Act, a reauthorization of the same bill, where they promise more and more money, but in return, they extract more and more control. And so, even up in Wisconsin, if you talk to anyone at in the state legislature, they'll say, well, Wisconsin's a local control state, so we can't do anything about it. But in fact, it's not true. Because they're just not willing to give up the money. Any state, in Wisconsin, and it's probably similar here in Illinois, I think we looked at it and it was about 8% of the state education budget gets paid by the federal government. But no state will even give up the 8% to say, we'll do it our way. Because the politicians will get crucified. Like, why would you give up free money? So that we all want something for nothing, and it just can't happen.
My name is Art Ellingson. I run the Tea Party here in Arlington Heights. And in comment to your just last answer, the Zeldin Amendment passed with 410 votes in Congress. And the Zeldin Amendment says that if you drop out of Common Core, you won't lose federal funding. But anyway, here's my question. 2 Novembers ago, I went to the District 214, Arlington Heights, that's the local school district right here. And we had a 9-minute long speech written by a lady who was quitting teaching because of Common Core. Now, they wouldn't let us read a 9-minute speech, so we had 3 or 4 of us to read a part of the speech. And then we concluded by saying, why are you guys, tell us what you're doing with Common Core. And they didn't give us an answer that night, but they sent me an email a couple days later, which said very clearly, we're not doing Common Core, but we're doing park testing. Now, that's like a contradictory statement. Now, a couple of days later, I went to a high school, and it was Veterans Day, and there's a front page article on the Elk Grove High School student newspaper about Common Core. And then I went back to some of these administrators and said, well, if you're not doing Common Core, why is there a full page article about what you're not doing on the front page of one of your high school's student newspapers? They couldn't answer that question. But how do you battle a school district who denies they're doing Common Core when we all know they are?
Well, there's a couple things. At first, about that amendment that you talked about to the Every Student Succeed Act, it does in fact say that states can't be held responsible for Common Core. Their money can't be taken back. But it does say that they have to have a college and career ready set of standards. And it also says that the Secretary of Education gets to decide whether it is or not. So in some ways you're right, but in other ways most states are going to take the path of least resistance. We'll just take the one we know is going to pass rather than fight it. In terms of getting things through in your high school or in your school district, the real problem now is because we've now had a generation where the funding comes from Washington. Most, at least the school districts in my area, if you go, it's pathetic because you go there and every vote on every item almost, whether that's spending or curriculum or textbooks or anything, is unanimous. Okay, there's no controversy. So either they're not bringing up the controversial items, or they're all just in the tank for it. So you need to vote people off, and they've done that in one of the districts in Wisconsin, in Germantown. They actually did. They turned over the not the student council, the Board of Education, is what it meant, and they voted Common Core out. So they're doing their own standards. But here's the problem, and what you really have to contend with is at the state level, the state mandates which test they have to take. And the Department of Education mandates that they have to take a test, and that was in No Child Left Behind. So, and guess what? Those tests are aligned with Common Core. So if you go one way, you're going to be judged by something you're not teaching, which you then have to ask yourself, is that fair to the teachers?
So we're going to take 2 more quick questions. We've got one here and then one in the back, and then I'm sure the guests will be willing to stick around if you have other questions after that.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mike. I've been to a couple of presentations over the last couple of years put on by teachers groups in favor of Common Core. And the thing they've driven home is the fact that they are upping the standards. Kids are going to learn more, quicker, faster, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I happened to just go online, YouTube, and my area of concern was math. And I Googled math problems, came up with 4th grade long division. And on this video, they're doing everything but long division. They're doing modeling, they're doing skip counting, multiplication. And then the teacher said, oh, by the way, now we'll get to long division, but that's not for you kids. That's for 6th grade proficiency or adults. Now, in 1959, I was in 3rd grade, and you know what we had pounded into us? Long division. 2 position, 3 position, divisors. Stayed up all night doing that homework. So they're not upping the standards, they're decreasing the standards, in my opinion. Secondly, I've read the tests. I'll be darned, I'm not stupid, but I can't comprehend what the hell they're asking me on some of these questions. So I'd like your comment on if there's been any comparison of comprehension on the kids' common core tests versus old standardized tests, which are more better comprehended by the kids.
Well, there are tests, and every year, I think this last year, they've gone down. We've gotten worse in math. But I want to point out another thing. And it gets to this gentleman's comment about parents as well. But here's one thing with math, and I have a math background. I regularly teach at the beginning of most semesters, the beginning of most school years, a seminar for parents so that they can be taught, parents of public school students, so they can be taught how to do the math that their kids are bringing home. Okay? Because they can't. So when Johnny or Jane brings home this math assignment, what does it cause at home? Not a wonderful, nurturing learning experience. It's hell on wheels. It's a fight, it's tears, it's, or it's the parents saying, oh, I know how to do that, let me show you a trick how they taught me in the olden days. And then they go to school and they get it all marked wrong because it's even though they may have learned how to do it, they're not getting it. So it causes strife between parents. It's actually, I think, designed to do that, to break parents away. The other thing it does, by doing all these, instead of showing a student first how to do something and then maybe later why it works, they sort of reverse those. So what they do is they make things seem very difficult. So they might show you how to do an algorithm on 1 or 2 digit numbers and then say for bigger numbers, well, that's not for you. You need to use a calculator or find an expert. Okay, so what it does is it creates a learned helplessness, which goes back into being sort of, listen to the people above you and just do as you're told. Trust us. So.
Do you have a quick comment, Marsha? Okay. In the back?
Real quick, my name's Dave Drake. I'm with Freedom Project Academy up in Appleton, Wisconsin. We're an online school. And to follow up on what Jeff was just saying about Germantown, in fact, it's gone one step further now. Because Germantown actually did 81% opt out of the test last year, the federal government is now threatening Wisconsin with withholding their education funds if they don't get Germantown in line. So we've got that now going on. The superintendent of Germantown is now running for state DPI position. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes because his school is not Common Core. As far as we know, it's the only public school in the nation that's not a Common Core school. So, and then to follow up on, somebody made the comment of dumbing down the testing and that kind of things. We actually in our school, our online school, we offer placement tests and we test students all over the United States. We're finding students in math anywhere between 2 and 4 years behind in their math levels. Now, what do you do with a young lady that's going to be a junior this year and you find out that she can't do 7th grade math and she's trying to get into some science program in her college in just 2 years? How do you help that girl? And that's one of the things that we struggle with every day as we're trying to help families get their children ready for college.
I just want to say one other thing with that, just to add on to that last example, like what do you do as a business owner when you come to a high school graduate who is supposed to know the math when they get out, and you realize that even though they did well on this Common Core math, they can't do basic things they need to do in business or estimate, things like that. I mean, that's what we're finding too. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I was the creator of the Math Common Core, Jason Zimba, actually had a statement last year where he basically told parents to stop helping your kids with math. So that's kind of where we're heading. But as we close tonight, let's give the speakers another round of applause real quick. I'm sure they'll be around here to answer more questions and stuff. On your table, if you'd like to help Heartland's work and how we're fighting Common Core and how we're fighting for school choice, because school choice is really the way we fix this in the long run, because the schools aren't going to fix themselves. We need to empower the parents instead of the bureaucracy to get the power out of the hands of and out of the state capitals, out of Washington, D.C., back to the local communities and the local parents, not even just the local school boards, because they're strapped at times as well because of all the mandates. And don't forget to stop back and get the book back here from Billy for $25, and I'm sure with Kirsten and everybody here, you can probably get them to sign the book as well. So on August 31st is our next night. We don't have a event the next 2 Wednesday nights. August 31st, we actually have an event with Dr. Jay Lair, and I believe it's Scott Denning is his opponent. They will be here debating global warming right here on the stage. So you're welcome to come back again in 2 weeks. August 31st, 2 weeks. So, yeah. August 31st. So 2 weeks from tonight, right here. Yeah. So thank you all for coming, and feel free to see me or any of the staff if you have any questions about Heartland, and please stick around, ask the speakers questions as well, and buy the book. Thank you.